Almost a month has passed since Israel and the US declared this aggressive war on Iran. We in the Communist Party of Israel have long-standing fraternal relations with our comrades in توده, the Iranian Communist Party, a party whose comrades have been struggling for the progress and independence of Iran and the Iranian people for decades. Today as we speak, the bombing of Iran and Lebanon is still going on. And speaking to us today is Comrade Muhammad Oomidfar, spokesperson and member of the Politburo of توده. Welcome, Comrade Muhammad.
Thank you, Comrade. Thank you.
It's very good to have you here. And let me start by asking, how are you doing under these circumstances?
Thank you for the invitation, Comrade. And we dearly appreciate the fraternal relationships we're having with our comrades there. And I also believe that you're working under very difficult circumstances as it seems. So I think it's an understatement to say that these are very difficult times for our country. And, as you mentioned in your opening statement, the bombings are continuing and the death toll and the destruction is significant. If you believe, and it's very difficult to get accurate figures, but there have been more than 1,500 people killed and 18,000 injured, 14 main cities and nearly 6,000 targets have been hit during these bombing campaigns by the American and the Israelis. And and you do, as you know, a lot of the historic sites have also been damaged, according to Iran's cultural ministry, more than 56 historic places, some of them UNESCO landmarks have been damaged during these bombing campaigns. So these are very difficult times. It's very difficult to get news out of the country because the internet is completely shut down and communications are very difficult with the country, both to know how your family and friends are doing, as well as your how the people are dealing. But one can say these are very difficult times, and the sooner we come to end of this destructive war, which I believe it was the initiative by the Netanyahu criminal government to start this war against, with the help of US imperialism, the better it is for the country, because it's having a big impact on the whole region as well. And I'm sure we'll be talking a bit more about that as we go through the interview. But these are difficult times.
I am sure they are, Comrade. I must mention that both our parties have condemned, alongside a lot of the communist parties around the world, condemned this attack from the first day. And together, several days after, we issued a joint statement together with the comrades in the Communist Party of the United States, CPUSA. And based on our long-standing relations, this was not a difficult task. But since then, we're almost 25 days into this aggression. Since then, we have seen the war goals change more than 10 times. Every few days, we hear a new goal, or an old new goal declared by Netanyahu and Trump, from ending Iran's nuclear capabilities, toppling the regime, destroying Iran's missile capabilities. All goals were allegedly, at least what was told to the Israeli public, all goals were allegedly reached and achieved in the last round in June 2025. Yesterday, Trump said that there are negotiations with Iran on stopping the war. Didn't take very long for the Iranian officials to go out and say, to call him very nicely a liar, and to denying this being true. How does your party see the true goals of this war? And to your assessment, is there a split today between the political system and the military system in Iran, as some claim, or are they in complementary relations still? And what kind of an influence does this tension maybe have on the alleged negotiations channel led by Kalibov?
Yeah, thank you, Comrade. So let me start. We had an enlarged plenary meeting of our Central Committee last week to discuss the latest issues and our views around the war and how it's going, and various potential scenarios that could develop over the next few weeks, few months, and the next year. So, and you mentioned, based on our analysis, there are slight difference between what the Israeli government agenda was, and they are very clear that they wanted to destroy Iran's capability and overthrow the regime. I'm sure that you've also read the news that Netanyahu said this was a dream that he's been carrying for 40 years, to destroy Iran and make Israel a superpower in the region without any significant challenge from anybody. And I think, it's very difficult to work out what exactly the American agenda was, besides, as they say, supporting Israel and following, their imperialistic plan of, having a clear hegemony on the whole region of Persian Gulf, because it's a strategic region, both in terms of long-term American policy, as well as the short-term and medium-term. And we've had various analysis coming out of Washington. Interesting, Mark Rubio, I think a day after the war, mentioned that we had to go into this war because Israel had started the attack, and if we did not go in, the Iranians would attack the American targets. The wild claims that Iran was within the week or days of having nuclear capabilities, while in June they said they obliterated the Iranian infrastructure. So I think it's very clear that this was more of an agenda for the Israeli government, in line with what they've been doing, the crimes they've been committing in Gaza, killing tens of thousands of Palestinians, occupying parts of Lebanon, occupying, over the last few days, going into Syria, and as Netanyahu said, creating this super Israeli state in the region. So from our point of view, and it's interesting to note, because I know part of the American claim was that they are going there to liberate the Iranian people. But what we must say, very clearly, is that this war, this attack, has harmed the people's movement in Iran significantly. The regime was in a very weak position during the, widespread protest during December and January. And, many people were killed, many people were arrested, but even the regime's leaders were talking about a very, very precarious position that they were in, and whether they will survive, because we were, after the killing of many thousands of protesters, we got to a stage where they were holding Remembrance Day on the 40th day of their death. And, there were again protests starting in universities and various places in remembering the people who've been killed. And the regime was in very difficult situation. With the attack and with the war, they have actually strengthened their position in that sense. It's a war situation. To think that, stupidly they're calling out people to come out in the street. How can people come out in the street if you're being bombed non-stop? This is the most, crazy position that, people will come into the street while we're bombing them and overthrow the regime. So it has really damaged the people's movement that was developing in creating a serious challenge to the Islamic Republic and its regime. And, it has set back the movement. We had almost on daily basis, we had workers' strikes, we have a very strong pensioners movement, we had student strike, women's, all that has now subsided because clearly people cannot come into the streets. Now, of course, also the other part, as I'm sure you have been following the news like ourselves, part of the Israeli position was to take out Iranian leaderships on various levels, which they have to some level successfully, and that would collapse the regime. And that hasn't happened because I think they didn't have a very good understanding of how complex the leadership structure within Iran is, and especially with the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij and all that being in place. Quite a complex.
Maybe you tell us more about this, please.
Yeah. So that hasn't happened, and we are not surprised that hasn't happened. And they are saying that they don't even know whether the son of Khamenei is still alive or not. But as you can see, the regime is functioning. The responding to the bombing by Israel and America is continuing. Strait of Hormuz has created a significant challenge to the West and America in terms of the war, and especially to American allies in the region, which are relying significantly on that. And the continuation of that will create, as some economists would tell you, could create a recession across the world, like what we saw in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I think if these were the basis of analysis that will bomb and kill a few leaders and the regime would collapse, this was very naive, and totally got it wrong. And as we see, we are in the 4th week of the war, and now Trump is talking about, going back to what you said about negotiating, having a strong negotiation. Now, you're right that Iran has denied that these negotiations were carrying on. They were in, and I know the Israeli Channel 12 had said Ghalibaf is now the main both military and political leader in Iran, and the Americans have no problem with them, and they will, negotiate with him. Ghalibaf was one of the leaders of the IRGC, and very much responsible for the savage suppression of the student uprising in 1999, where they attacked the university. He was, at the forefront of that with other leaders of the revolution. So, to call him a moderate and somebody they can deal with, that's not our analysis. But having said that, there are news that there has been indirect talks. There is significant news that one has to take seriously, that the head of the Pakistani Armed Forces, General Asim Munir, talked to Trump on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And today we saw a post by Pakistani Prime Minister saying that they would be honored and happy to host the negotiation between Iran and America. So there are definitely things happening in the background. There were other unconfirmed news by an Arabic newspaper that the supreme leader has sanctioned the negotiations. But none of these are confirmed. There are clearly, through third parties, messages going back and forth. And I think it's also clear that the Trump government, with this stupidity, starting a war without any plan, without any justification, is under a lot of pressure in America, even from its MAGA base and part of the Republican Party saying, well, what are we doing? It's costing us billions of dollars without any clear objective, without knowing what the outcome is for us. So there are clearly plans behind the scenes to see if America can come out of it declaring victory, like Bush did in, following the 2000 attack in Iraq, and saying everything is done, and, while nothing was done. But I think from the Iranian point of view, and this has been repeated by the foreign minister, and I think we should agree that you need this peaceful settlement. Stopping bombing is not a peaceful settlement, because as it proved, following June, Israel could attack again, America could attack again. So you need a peaceful, long-term peaceful settlement, so that there's no restart 3 months later saying, oh, they're an imminent threat now within 2 days, and they start bombing again. So that's quite clear, and I think the Iranian side is constantly saying that we need a long-term peace settlement, and that's critical for us. So it is, I think, one has to wait and see, but there are definitely things going behind the behind the scene in terms of a number of countries. Oman, Egypt, Pakistan, even Turkey are involved in sending messages, especially for the Persian Gulf states. This is a serious economic situation. It's really having a big impact on their economies, and on they used to be believed as a very stable, safe haven for a lot of economic developments. That's all been shattered at the moment. So yeah, we'll have to see. It was interesting in the report that they published about the Pakistani discussions with Trump. One other issue that came out, and that also came out in a Guardian report about the previous negotiation, which seemed to have been going well, is that the Iranians and others also believe that Witikoff and Jared Kushner are Israeli assets, and therefore negotiating with them, there's no point. And they will just follow the line by Netanyahu government. I think in this set of reports about the Pakistani, J.D. Vance has emerged as the U.S. representative to lead these negotiations. And interestingly, has been relatively quiet during the war. So, and there are various news items about whether he's not necessarily fully in line with Trump on that. So I think over the next few days, we'll see a bit more on that. But what we can say is that at least Ghalibaf has himself denied that there's had any dealings, and the Iranian deputy foreign minister also denied that there's been no direct talks, but they have said that there have been indirect messages being back and forth.
Thank you, comrade. One thing that we cannot maybe sometimes get all the information on Iran. You already said that, of course, the internet connection is cut. You cannot communicate. But it's very interesting for us because Iran is a very big country in population and in land. And we saw over the news that more than 81,000 civilian sites were bombed. And you talked before about the damaging and the destroying, the bombings of international heritage and cultural heritage, which Iran is very much known for. Being destroyed by bombings like we saw in Syria and like we saw in Iraq. And of course, we do not forget the first day where they bombed a school with girls, over 160 persons, most of them children. These are things that I think all of us will remember from this war. But also on the other side, what are the costs of this war on Iran, meaning the people? What sort, are there shelters, public shelters, private shelters? Is there a humanitarian crisis? Have all the parts of Iran been bombed, or is it being centered in certain places? Because we saw a very vicious attack on civilian infrastructure, health, schools, culture, energy supply, and so on. So, what does it look like, and what kind of tools do the Iranian people have to deal with such a crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you put it very eloquently that the war has done a significant damage to the infrastructure of the country. Beside, and these figures are just civilians. We don't know about the military figures at all. They're never published. At least 1,500 civilians have been killed, some 18,000 injured. The infrastructure damage from factories to you mentioned schools, hospital, Minab school that 168, many of them children, girls were killed. Those are crime against humanity. Those need to be investigated as crime against humanity, and perpetrators brought to the justice for those. So there has been many civilian casualties. There are not infrastructure to support the people going into shelters as such, and the indiscriminate bombing and cruise missiles and other missiles hitting. I saw pictures just an hour ago of a massive attack both in Isfahan, in Tehran, in Tabriz. These are the main cities in Iran, and Isfahan being one of the most historic places in the world. So I think as it stands, it will, post-war will definitely have a much clearer picture of what the damage has been done. But it is clear that it's devastating, and it will have a big impact on our economy. Because as it stands, many businesses, small businesses have closed. They can't continue under these circumstances. And that does have an impact on people. There are unconfirmed reports of 3.2 million people being displaced in the country. That's a massive number. Okay, Iran has a population of around 90 million, but over 3 million.
Anyway, it's yes.
is a massive number. Sure. Because people have left the big cities to go into provinces, and try to, stay safe, and, going into villages, all sorts of things. I think, beside the fact that the economic policies of the regime before the war, new liberal policies, we're talking at the end of the day, we're talking about a capitalist dictatorship in the country, that brought real economic devastation to the country, while the gap between the rich and the poor intensified to unprecedented levels. Even according to the official statistics, we had nearly 40 million people living below poverty lines in the country. And this is a country with, rich natural resources. Okay, we have to also acknowledge that what I would call criminal US sanctions, economic sanctions, had an impact, and mainly on the ordinary people of the country, like it did in Iraq. But the policies pursued by the dictatorship over the years, over 30, 40 years, filling in the pockets of the big capitalist classes that represent, that are in power, has had a big impact. That's why, we have more people living, effectively, as one economist put it, we are in danger of losing the middle classes in the country, or the petty bourgeoisie, if you like, disappearing from the country because they're all being pushed to the below poverty line state. So I think these are important points, and that's why the movement, the people's movement against the regime was so strong. If you look at the past 6-7 years, almost every 2 years, there's been mass movements across hundreds of cities against the regime, challenging the regime, challenging this theocratic, despotic structure. And therefore now we've seen a big setback now by these, military, mindless, criminal military campaigns that effectively is more than anything else affecting the ordinary lives of our people.
I truly agree. We heard a lot about the shortage, the water shortage that is existing in Iran, the collapses of entire lands because of the geographical or the environmental changes. And of course, the regime is responsible for that. And I totally agree that this war has made the regime stronger rather than the opposition stronger
Yeah,
in Iran. And
yeah, and if I just
yeah,
add
please.
here, because I think it's important. So I would comfortably say most of the freedom-loving, national, and progressive forces in the country have outright condemned this war, as an aggression against, our sovereignty, as an aggression against the country, asking effectively, defending the country. We have to defend our country. There's only two forces I can mention that, in fact, have asked Trump and have asked the Israelis to bomb their country. These are the Shah supporters who are mainly in America. They have very strong link with Netanyahu and the Israeli, and the Israeli Mossad and their security service have been largely responsible for setting up thousands of social media networks to support them and to prop them. And the other forces are Mujahideen. They're based in Albania, and they also used to have quite strong links with the Israelis and Americans. And these are the only two forces effectively are happy about the country being bombed and thinking that they can victoriously come back to the country after the bombing. And these are effectively traitors to the people's movement and our country.
Since you mentioned Mujahideen, I think not that I'm putting them in the same row of the progressive opposition, but I think a lot of us know about the history of Tude. But on the other hand, a lot of us also ask, what happened? What happened in 1979? What happened in the years after it? Tude is a party that was established in 1941. And I think it's the oldest opposition progressive party in Iran that is still existing and functioning and active until today. I think the readers and the viewers of our newspaper and our outlets would like to hear it directly from our comrades from Tude. How did the revolution end up in the hands of the Islamists? And what kind of persecution and opposition did our comrades in Tude have during those years and later, of course?
Thank you. Yes, and as you mentioned, our party was established in October 1941, and the party was a continuation of the Communist Party of Iran, which was in June, 20 years before that. Of course, Reza Shah, the grandfather of this Shah, passed a law we called it the Black Law, which outlawed any party being called communist, and therefore the party chose the name Tude to be able to start his life again. It's in October we'll be celebrating 85 years of struggle by the party. Following the 1953 coup d'etat in Iran, which was organized by CIA and MI6, which overthrew the nationalist government of Dr. Mossadegh, a significant suppression of the party unleashed. Thousands of comrades were arrested. Army, three different range of army comrades were executed by the regime, by the coup regime, and the party was, went through quite a difficult time to, survive and then restart its activities. Now, interestingly, during the Shah, they saw religion as a green, what they call the green belt against Soviet Union and the left and the communists. So religious forces did have a lot of freedom, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, during the Shah, he built some 2,000 mosques, and introduced religious studies into schools and, high schools, and, and religious leaders were, most of the religious leaders, not all of them, were in support of the regime. So, coming to the 70s, the left was heavily suppressed. Not only the party, the Fedayeen, and also the Mujahideen at that time were heavily suppressed. And the mosques were the only places where you could effectively organize. And, and as it happens, ironically, they became a center of, center of resistance to the Shah's regime during the 70s. Now, the Iranian Revolution, we evaluated as a national democratic revolution that had very clear anti-imperialist, aspirations, because, at the time of the Shah, we had some 30,000 American military advisors in Iran, and Iran was viewed as a listening post against the Soviet Union, and also as a gendarme of the region. The Shah and Israel were the two gendarmes of the region for the American imperialists. So the revolution happened is where, most of our comrade leadership were either in prison, having spent nearly 25 years in prison, or were in exile. And this applied to the, other left forces. So that's why the religious forces had an upper hand. And, people saw them as an alternative. Now, it's interesting now reviewing some of the documents that have come out. At that time, Carter, through its military advisor, I think General Heuser, exchanged messages with Ayatollah Khomeini, effectively saying that we will be okay with the revolution to succeed if there were 2 or 3 promises they wanted. And one of them was not to allow the party to operate freely in Iran after the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the conditions set. And, the party, despite that, following the revolution, became a mass party. We grew out of, very small group of colleagues, comrades who came back to Iran. The party grew. The first, I think, May Day celebration, the party held about 50,000 people attended, and it very quickly became a mass party. In fact, Khamenei, who was killed by the Israelis, terror earlier on, in one of his writings, says at the beginning of the revolution, we were very worried about the influence of the party, because we saw that influence in the constitution, we saw the influence in the laws that were being passed, some of the things, including the land reform, including nationalization of foreign companies, a lot of those were effectively left policies. They were not Islamic policies, they were left policies. So, and I think very soon, once the regime established itself after 2.5, 3 years, they realized that this is a serious threat, despite the fact that the party was supporting the revolution. They saw the left and Fedayeen Mujahideen and the party as a threat, and therefore they unleashed, 1983, they unleashed this massive attack on the party. And it's fair to say that according to the regime itself at that time, within the 3 months of, sustained attack against the party, they arrested over 10,000 party members and supporters, including almost the entire party leadership. Politburo, Central Committee, Secretariat, senior comrades within the army, they're all arrested, and some the army officers were executed, including the head of the Navy.
Army officers who were comrades.
Yes, comrades, yeah. Head of the Navy, head of the armed forces that actually were heroes of the Iran-Iraqi war, and stopped the Iraqi army advancing. Comrade Afzali, who was the head of the army, was known for defeating the Iraqi Navy in the Persian Gulf. They were all arrested and they were all executed as part of the show trials that they were accused of spying for Soviet Union and then executed. Typical, like what happened at the time of the Shah and army officers. And then later on, they had out show trials of some of our Central Committee members. And then in 1988, as they were ending the Iraq war, thousands of political prisoners were executed in prisons, including almost all our party leadership. And, I think from our Politburo Central Committee and leading cadres of the party, we lost something like 38 people. Either died under torture or executed in mass trials, which, Amnesty, they were called into this course that lasted 5 minutes, and they had 2 or 3 key questions. Are you a Muslim? Are you prepared to repent? Are you prepared to work? And, no to any of those, and you will be sent. And, they were all killed. So that's what happened. And that's why, it took quite a long time for the party to re-emerge. I think, even I have to say, and it's not boasting in any way, but the party remains the main political left force in the country. There are others that are fed into different groups, but our party is still the main party. And the regimes know that. Actually, a few years ago, Khamenei ordered the replaying of those show trials of our comrades. He said, I'm worried about the influence of the Marxists in the universities. So he asked the televisions to show all those show trials of our party leaders, again.
To intimidate again.
Yeah. So it remains, I think, it's been very difficult. It's been very difficult to rebuild the party because we lost some of the leading philosophers, writers, economists, artists, human rights activists, women rights activists, trade union activists during those times. And to rebuild in what was also very difficult global situation with the collapse of the Soviet Union has been a difficult task. But the party is continuing and remains as a significant force against the dictatorship in Iran.
Sure is. Comrade, I think we can have this this conversation on a lot of other subjects that I'm very interested in knowing more and in digging deeper. But I think to try and conclude and maybe look forward a bit, it is very interesting for us, and perhaps you could share with us more on the where does توده, and I'm sure you are in contact with other opposition parties or movements. How do you see the perspective? How does the Iranian people have a way out of this to liberate their country only by their own means? This is, of course, what we believe, but it's very interesting for us. What is the discourse today in the opposition alongside توده, looking into the future perspective in a week, in 2 weeks, in 3 months? This war will be over sometime. How do you see it?
As I mentioned in our enlarged plenary meeting, we discussed this, and I think the key at this stage is ending the war. With the war, you can't talk about building a movement. You got to end the war. And we issued a statement calling all the progressive forces in the country, left, nationalists, even some of the reformist people who have distanced themselves from the regime, to come together for both national and international peace movement, where we can bring pressure, and effectively force an ending to the war, because that is critical for going forward with the war continuing, and more damage on the country. And in up to last week they were talking about occupying parts of Iran, sending land forces to occupy. I mean, those will really be quite disastrous for the country. Getting into war. We had the experience of 8 years of Iran-Iraq war, which brought nothing but devastation and millions killed and injured, and we still suffer from that. So that's number one. The opposition is fractured, including the left, and this has been a problem. For many years, our party position has been that we need to form a united anti-dictatorial front based on very broad slogans around the freedom of political prisoners, around an ending of suppression, very broad, that all progressive forces could agree without having to measure against their ideology or their political program. But this hasn't happened. It was interesting that following the December and January uprising, there was more of a serious move from different political forces in the country and outside the country to see if a broad front can be brought together that bring significant and lasting change to the country. Now, as it stands, that is on pause, and that's not going any further. And we are hoping that, and we'll be talking over the next few days and weeks to various political forces and in the left and elsewhere, to see if we can significantly and immediately build a peace movement for a end to the hostilities, so that then we can concentrate on the struggle in the country. And it would be interesting to see now what changes, if any, happens in Iran. There are all indications that today they announced the replacement for Larijani, who was killed. And
yes,
interestingly, he was viewed as a person who West could deal with, and Israelis, I think, quite knowingly targeted him, because he was behind the previous negotiations with Americans, and all that. So what the appointment today is Zolgat, who used to be one of the heads of the IRGC, is a hardliner and responsible for suppression of the people's movement in Iran. And I think over the past few weeks and days, also we are seeing the attack on progressives in Iran, albeit under the guise of these are Israeli or American agents, or anybody criticizing the regime can be labeled as that. So it is interesting to see post that peace and ceasefire where Iran is heading. But what is clear is that without a united progressive movement, without a united progressive alternative to the regime, we are in danger of external intervention, like they're trying to impose a
boots on the ground, or invasion,
or internally the regime just being able to continue as they have been able to continue despite numerous uprisings, despite numerous protests.
Comrade Muhammad, as I said, we can have many more hours of this discussion and learning about توده and about the situation in Iran. I can conclude and say that we hope this war will be over very soon. Here in Israel, as a Communist Party and as Hadash, we have been protesting since the first week, and we are continuing to protest and to gather much more mobilization and support among the Israeli public to demand this war stops right now, and that civilians in Iran, in Lebanon, in Israel, and everywhere else are kept out of this very aggressive imperialist war, unnecessary war, because as we both agree and know, they will go back to negotiations and to diplomacy. And that is the only way that we believe these kinds of wars will not be waged again. Thank you very much, Comrade Muhammad.
Thank you, comrade, and our, comrade solidarity with the struggle, with the very brave struggle you're continuing to wage in this difficult situation for you as well. So, and as you said, we are in the same struggle for peace and the ending of this destructive war for all the people in the region.
We are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, comrade.